and what they, how they explain consciousness, etc. And they were saying, well, after an awakening or understanding what this is made of, how this works, it's like the beginning. And actually, there are other awakenings, and there's awakening of the body, there's awakening of the heart, and it's just ongoing. It's so rich and so full that it's there's more and more to appreciate and experience what to experience.
Interesting.
Comments?
Well, in realization, one of the most profound and in a way surprising aspects of realization is the discovery that this is one thing, and it's one thing inclusive, and it has no parts and no hierarchy. So there is no body, there is no heart, which is not to say that there is not continual, ongoing, eternal, unfoldment, dynamism, apparent development, and so on and so forth. But it is not oriented around anything other than the totality. In other words, it's not oriented towards actually existent subsystems like a body or a heart or a mind or a soul or a this or a that, because all of those partialities don't actually exist. And in realization is the discovery that they don't exist. It's quite clear, it's very apparent. You discover that this is one thing, and all of the apparent differentiations of that one thing that humans spend all their time being concerned with don't actually exist as any actual separation. They're actually apparent presentations of the one thing.
Well, the conversation continued for quite a while about whether the infinite can actually, there was agreement that the infinite can only be experienced through the finite.
What? There is no finite.
Well, it has to be experienced through body mind.
Absurd.
Otherwise, it would be
absurd. But it is body minds, so there is no through. The body minds don't exist.
But
it fabricates any convenience for its own apparent process. Exactly. So it fabricates, and it's like when you dream. It's like it says a dream has to be experienced through a dream body. So when I dream, I have to dream a dream body so I can then dream the dream. It's like the dreaming of the dream body and the dreaming of the dream are one and the same. So the generation of a finite body and to experience the infinite there's nothing happening there. It's a zero-sum game. That is the infinite.
Well, how is the infinite experienced?
Its nature is to experience itself. There is nothing other than infinity experiencing itself.
But if it experiences itself through
itself.
Which is but it's not all one thing.
It is all one thing. It is all one thing. It is one thing with an exclamation point.
And in bold.
In bold, underlined.
Bold capital letters.
Miraculously, its nature is to be able to experience itself. It's a city.
Experience is an experience of it.
Exactly. And well, that was the point. And the experience.
And what was the point?
The point that the experience of the infinite is always changing, evolving,
right?
And it's.
But no. It never changes, it never evolves. It always apparently changes and apparently evolves. I would say it presents with endless dynamism and endless diversity without there being any actual dynamism or actual diversity or actual change. It's very paradoxical. The infinite never becomes more itself, while it continually apparently unfolds to itself with infinite deepening and evolution and so on and so forth. But nothing's actually happening. It just looks like that. It's very, very strange. It doesn't make sense, you know.
You can't talk about
When you look at what it really is from a point of view of actually seeing what it really is, not from a erroneous human perspective, you discover that the way it is very strange by contrast with human expectation.
Well, expectations isn't an experience. I mean, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, obviously. But in particular, in this, there is no actual development, there is no actual progress, and yet it presents as if there was that, while there not being that. And that is part of its peculiarity. There is no actual variety, there is no actual differentiation, and it presents as if it was that, and that's an aspect of its peculiarity. That's a very unexpected result if you were trying to approach it from within a paradigm of human normalcy or just typical human paradigm, you know, and you're trying to extrapolate what's going on here. It seems to me anyway as a rather unexpected result. But in realization, this becomes immediately apparent and completely clear.
You can't totally discount the apparent human vehicle in which it is experienced.
What does discount mean?
Yeah.
To say that it's not necessary.
What's necessary mean?
That it's not a requirement.
Okay, this body is here, it's a requirement. This cup is here, it's a requirement. You know, this napkin is here, it's a requirement. What does requirement mean?
Well, we're talking about having an experience, the infinite experiencing itself.
Right.
Now, is there a medium for that? How does it?
It is its own medium.
Exactly.
Every quark is the infinite experiencing itself. Every photon is the infinite experience itself. Every amoeba is the infinite experience itself. Every infinite space projection of spatial potentiality that a Big Bang occurs in is the infinite experiencing itself. Anything that is the infinite experiencing itself, and it doesn't need a medium. It doesn't need to have an intermediary to affect that process.
Let's just assume that when we talk about anything,
Yeah.
any kind of object, it's an apparent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then anything goes.
Okay.
Anything and everything goes.
Okay.
All kinds of lies.
What they were saying was it was fascinating that there is an apparent endless awakenings and
Compared to what though?
to not have meaning, and suddenly it's
But
like
that's not express.
Every instant is an awakening, but that's not realization.
no, that's already happened. That's the background. That's like a given. Well,
Anyway,
I just found that interesting. And
what aspect of it did you find particularly interesting personally?
well, that I mean, you hear this a lot in spiritual circles about the opening of the heart, and that can be understood prior to realization or after to a realization. Apparent everything, of course. Well, well,
It was off camera. We're safe.
That's the running
Look,
line.
you
and
have
that's
to
what people
understand that these notions don't actually exist as such. The heart in spiritual let me go on for a sec. The heart in spiritual parlance is a euphemism for feeling, intuiting some kind of non-rational or supposedly non-mental or less mental engagement, as opposed to the head. And it's often, you know, in human metaphor systems, there's often the head versus the heart. And so this opening of the heart is a euphemism for engaging with experiential reality as a felt presence, which is essential for realization. In fact, it's part and parcel of realization. But there is no heart, and it isn't an opening. So all of this poetic hyperbole, very romantic for the opening of the heart, is a big boogeyman that is erected in people's fantasy and turned into being something. And the something that it actually consists of is being with this in the way that it actually is with itself, which is as a felt presence. Reality feels itself. Perception is feeling. And when you see that, then everything is, you know, a heart open, an opened heart presence. I don't know what, you know, I don't know what kind of poetry you'd want to throw at that. But the actuality has nothing to do with the heart. And it actually has nothing to do with an opening either, because there's never a closing.
There is an opening.
No, there's no opening because there never was anything closed.
There's a fucking big change that
Ooh,
happened.
pissed her off now.
Okay, all right. And what is this change?
Fucking big, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Without going into euphemism and opening or closing of body parts. Yes, you can say what it is. You can say what it is. You can say very specifically what it is. It is when the experiential, when experience identifies itself as what it is versus identifying itself with a fantasy of itself, which is the nature of delusion.
Like a singularity.
When experience identifies itself erroneously, that the erroneous fantasy that it's identifying with is a partial aspect of itself. So it seems like a less, so it seems like a closure. But it's not, because there's nothing open or closed. And
what else could it be?
And when experience realizes what it is and experiences itself as it is, it can feel, relative to that apparent closure, it can feel like a relative opening, but nothing is any more open than it ever was, because nothing was ever closed.
It was shocking, right? It was shocking to you.
Sure, it's shocking. Yes, it's shocking.
Well, all right.
But it's not an opening.
Well, okay,
It's surprising.
Okay, then the big surprise.
Yeah, the big surprise is discovering how wrong you were.
Exactly.
But there's nothing. But there's no opening and there's no
I
heart.
think you should take that up as your method of teaching. We'll call it the big surprise.
You know what, Peter, something you just said, it's a big surprise, but the surprise is that it was never closed. The surprise is
Yes.
that the fantasies aren't wrong. They're just fantasies,
Yeah.
but they're not, there's
Sure.
nothing wrong with them.
Absolutely.
In other words, that all the delusion is just, it's like a cloud passing in the sky. It's just another aspect of the wholeness.
Yeah.
It's all reality.
Exactly.
But
And
and
that's
when you see that, that's surprising.
And then you don't have to do anything else. But most spiritual teachers have to use all these words because most people can't get there other than through these
Well,
new
Say
fantasies.
you don't have to do
I think they just use those words to keep themselves in business.
I think that's
so. I
largely
think they
true.
keep themselves
I think the
themselves.
problem with much spiritual
You can see
teaching.
what happens when you do it.
Yeah.
It's right.
Well,
It's just the same old crap. Sorry.
Well, you don't make
It's a
any
good old
money if
bone.
you tell it like it is.
I love this old one.
Yeah. So bone is a good one.
I think much of the problem with spirituality, the way it's presented, is it's presented as if it was being presented to human beings who are individuals.
Yeah.
And there are no human beings and there are no individuals. And so, you know, a clear, accurate spiritual teaching has to be presented towards what's actually here, which is not a human being. And so when you cater to supposed people and their supposed emotions and their feelings, and they're trying to rise above this and they're aspiring to that and this, that, and the other, you're not doing them any favors in the spiritual sense, because you're just playing into all these fantasies which have no basis in fact, which is the problem. Giving those things credence is the problem in the first place,
Well,
to the extent there is a problem.
And they
Replacing
post them all
old-
on Facebook.
Well, it's replacing old fantasies with new fantasies.
So
is
the
all.
irony of it is, though, that both are actually true. I mean, we live in both worlds.
No, there's
Understand-
there are no two worlds. There's only one world.
But there is a
I'm gonna
forgetting.
give up.
There's a forgetting. There's a forgetting, and both are
There doesn't.
fine.
Yes, that's true.
And we
But forgetting
need
isn't actually.
positive-
But forgetting isn't actually forgetting.
It isn't, but we seem to live as an individual, as an apparent individual with all the permutations of that. That's still going on, no matter how
But it's
realized.
not, it's
There-
not. it's
there's
not-
no doubt that's going on.
There's no past, there's no future, there's only now.
And not even that.
Well, there is now.
It's pretty skinny.
Skinnier than I'll ever be, honey.
No, I mean, that's it, really, you're
Well,
talking,
that's not, okay, so before you had said you never really understood now. And now became much more of an understanding of you. Before you realized this, recognized.
everything changed when I recognized. Whatever it was,
And yet nothing changed.
No, I recognize that nothing has changed, that's what.
That's the recognition. It's just
The thing is, the only thing I would argue with the way you're putting it is there's no two worlds. In fact, there's no world at all. All there is an infinite context which presents itself as infinite dimensions of innuendo, which aren't necessarily consonant with each other. And these infinite dimensions of innuendo are continually morphing and evolving and floating in and out and coming in and out. And each of them implies a certain, possibly implies a certain, flavor or gestalt of organizational hierarchy or structure or something. But these things are coming in and out without any rhyme or reason, continually. And the nature of what this is to present like that. But there are no worlds. There are no. Yeah.
It's just reality.
It's just reality.
How it's experienced is.
How it's experienced is as this incoherent presentation of innuendo, of endless apparent experiential qualities that present in various degrees of coherence or incoherence or alignment, that all are pregnant with apparent implication of worldviews, of being this or that, of whatever, but in a very dreamlike way, and they come and they go in a mysterious morphing way, and they overlap and they coexist, and there's no rhyme or reason, and this is what it is, and it's like that. It's always been like that, and it always will be like that. The only error is to hold that all that is occurring within some actual structure. And this is the very nature of delusion, supposing that all that's occurring within the confines of the biological functioning of a human body, or within the confines of the functioning of a physical universe in biospheres. And I mean, within any degree of structure you want to put out there, to suppose that all of these is a sub-event within that, and that is not the case. All of this presentation is the structure. The structure is this endless morphing of bubbles of innuendo and bubbles of seeming
It's not okay.
implication.
Coherence.
Yeah. Well, maybe coherence, maybe not so much.
Apparent coherence.
Yeah. And the fantasy that there's some overarching structure or hierarchy to that is the very nature of delusion. That's the seed of delusion right there.
There's a structure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to know itself through how we seem to know ourselves.
It's the other way around. you seem to be knowing yourself is a very subtle, is a very side effect of it seeming to know itself. And some of these bubbles look as if they might be interpreted as being a you or your life or this or that, but others of them don't, and they all coexist. And to put any precedence or give any dominance or more importance to certain perspectives over other perspectives is error.
What do you mean, dominance?
As in from certain perspectives, it seems like you have a body and a life. From other perspectives, it seems like you don't. And neither of those perspectives, in the case of that particular example, has any precedence. Neither is truer than the other. They're alternative views.
But they both seemingly are happening.
Sure. Yeah, as along with a bazillion other seeming dimensions of happening, and they all coexist, and they're all equally true, and none of them is actually true. What's true is that they are the seemings. They are the Maya, you might say, in Hindu metaphysics. The nature of this is to present itself to itself as all of that.
Well, you could say that it's not that these different bubbles, as you call them, aren't true, it's that they're not independent.
Right, they're not independent, they're all equally true.
And right, exactly. And the error is in thinking that the illusion of a separate person or a before and after and all that those are just bubbles that are not, they're not independent structures, they're not independent.
Yeah.
They're not concrete either.
Right.
There's never any stagnant point.
No stagnant point.
I don't think anybody's saying that they're off.
When you speak about the heart or the body or the mind or any of that, you are. That's what people understand it to be. Which is why I think it's an error for most teachers who use those words. They're confusing people rather than helping them in any way. If there was any need to help them in the first place, actually, so I don't think there's any need to help anybody.
Of course not.
So, the truth. No.
I'm glad we're taking care of that. Next.
Yeah. Right?
There are times where it's really easy to assign whatever shows up as radiant presence, and there are other times where something punches you in the gut and you just can't get there. I just can't get there.
You may have too limited a notion of what radiant presence is. You may be having a notion of radiant presence is like this with this set of qualities or whatever, and as contrasted with something like this, which is less so. The very nature of radiant presence is it's 100% a chameleon, you could say. It can present as any quality whatsoever. It can present as limitless stuckness, pain, suffering, confusion. In other words, there's no radiant presence versus lesser or not radiant presence.
Right. It's just remembering it. It's like even having the idea.
Yeah, it's not a matter of if it's a felt presence, then that is radiant presence.
Right.
And there's nothing that's not a felt presence. So the trick is, if there is a trick, I would say, is to feel presence. And which is inclusive. I mean, that's comprehensive. Anything that presents is by its very nature present, and that presence is the radiant presence. The radiance is just the fact that it presents with whatever seeming flavors and characteristics it seems to present as, which is an absolutely limitless palette.
And sometimes there's just a sense of being so stuck that you just have no recollection that there's such thing.
Yeah, but stuckness is one of its major modes,
Right.
and self-forgetting is one of its major modes. So self-forgetting and stuckness is a sure sign of radiant presence, because that's near the top of the list of its of its modes, you might say. I mean, the real problem is we're used to this playing games as humans. The human mindset, human normalcy is inherently used to playing a game of, having versus not having, achieving versus not achieving. It's this or it's not this. And radiant presence isn't like that.
Yeah.
There is no either or. And so, and yet even the game of playing either or is one of radiant presence modes. It does that. But it is not that. It's outside that, so it can do it. And the sort of I guess, I mean, that's probably the real, if one might suppose that's the real catch point or issue or threshold of realization, is to see that radiant presence is outside and inclusive of all this either or. When you're putting radiant presence within the either or, so radiant presence is either an either or an or, you're not seeing it like it is. Radiant presence is that which is doing the either or. Radiant presence is that which enables the either or to happen and is in fact literally doing it. And is playing chess with itself. Radiant presence is the either and it's the or. So it's like, it's like there's no them, there's no it, there's no enemy, there's no antithesis, there's no opposite. I mean, I suppose philosophically that's the that's the basis of this whole notion of non-duality, which I personally hate, because I think it's very misleading and simplistic. Because in fact, it itself is doing all of the either or. It itself is doing all the duality, but it intrinsically is not subject to what it's doing. And so I mean, and it's a fundamental issue to see that radiant presence is not in the category of things that can be in the either or category. Radiant presence is beyond that, and yet permeatively included in that, because it's what all that is made of.
Right.
All the ethers and all the ors are all radiant presence. So the contraction and then the blissful openings, that's radiant presence on both sides. Radiant presence is you don't get more or less radiant presence. You don't get winning or losing radiant presence. It's just, it's the fundamental substance and motive of everything. So it's the good guys and the bad guys are all radiant presence. Success and failure is all equally radiant presence. And so that's why when you get radiant presence, that's how you get liberated, because you're beyond success and failure. You're beyond pleasure and pain, literally. Because you discover that you are. Radiant presence is actually, it is present, whatever's present. When absolute failure and pain and suffering and closure and delusion and psychosis is present, that's balls to the wall, full on radiant presence.
Right.
So that losing is winning from the radiant presence point of view, and no less so than when you have openings and bliss and inclusion and enlightenment and inspiration and all that. That's no more or no less radiant presence than the other. So radiant presence is the absolute given, and it's not something that can be part of some gamesmanship or of having or not having, or of more or less.
Well, it also seems to be a mistake to think of radiant presence in a static form.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we think of, these moments in time or these experiences that we have, then, you cannot abstract this from itself. So it's always just this sort of moving, mass of everything.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's absolute. You can't
so much of the Enlightenment idea is about there being a point or a moment or a state or a abstraction or a, you know, some sort of plateau on which we rest, when in fact that's all just illusory as well.
Yeah, radiant presence has no findable condition. It has no findable nature. It is and does all conditions and all natures, but it itself cannot be found as anything or not. You know, I mean, you know, you've heard me no doubt many times use this word unresolvability, and probably the principal characteristic of radiant presence is unresolvability, which means that you can't pin down. You can't pin it down. You cannot pin it down. You can't actually find it even. But and which characteristic of unresolvability also applies to any and everything experientially, which is the proof, if you need to do the math, that experience is radiant presence. You'll look at anything that you think exists, and you will not, and if you look very closely, you will not be able to find out what it is. Period. And that's weird, because you know, from any kind of a normal human perspective, the assumption is, well, things are what they are. And radiant presence comes along and says, no, they aren't. They seem to be what they are, but then you go looking at what they seem to be and you don't actually find it. You literally do not actually find it. It doesn't resolve to actually precisely being that. The closer you get to it, the fuzzier it gets. And eventually it's like, well, what was I looking for? You can't find anything, because it opens up. It's like trying to get to the end of a rainbow. You know, which I'm sure is where that wonderful myth of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow comes from. And when you discover that you can't find anything that you experience actually, even though the experience of it seems so cut and dried and blatantly obvious, when you look precisely and try and pin down what's actually there, you don't find anything. And then you're looking for radiant presence itself, which is the, you know, the substratum or the let's say the actual condition, the actual substance, the actual energy of everything, of experience itself, and you can't find it either. So I mean, it all converges on a non-convergence, on the non-convergence of the unresolvability, which is the very core nature of radiant presence. I mean, that's why I call it radiant presence, because it's a presence, but you can't find presence. It's not a thing that is present. It's just a presence. And you're looking for presence, you can't find it, but it's blatant. It's completely obvious. It's completely obvious that experience is present, but you can't find it, and you can't find the presence that it is. And it's radiant because it unceasingly presents as endless suggestion and seeming and innuendo of all these apparent experiential qualities, you know, across any dimension of subtlety or whatever, of sensory or asensory or transsensory or whatever. And, you know, and so this presence that is continually presenting as something, but that cannot actually be found and doesn't resolve into actually being anything findable, you know, which is you know, again, from a simplistic point of view, a rather peculiar situation. But once you get that is objectively the actual situation, then we can recalibrate, and then things start actually to make a lot more sense. You get, oh, there's nothing really here, you know, but the potential to seem like there's something here, which and the unceasing exercise of that potential, without ever actually resolving to or coming to or finalizing as anything that's actually here.
Even the looking is unresolved.
Yeah, every
Right.
aspect of it. Any aspect of it, from any degree of concreteness, any degree of, you know, noun versus verbness, any degree of subjectivity versus objectivity, any degree of any parameter you approach it in terms of, you can't find anything. You just can't find it. And yet here it all is. So it's this, you know, so it's this very strange radiance of all of this apparition, just constantly flooding the experiential field without anything actually being there.
far as I can tell, the only awakening is somehow, fast or slow, becoming kind of just, well, okay, that's the way it is, rather than worrying about trying to resolve it.
Oh, absolutely. Awakening is seeing what is. I mean, that's why I like this word realization, because you're realizing, what it is and the way it is. And it actually gets clearer and clearer once you begin to see the way it is. It's very obvious. It's blatantly obvious that it is that way.
Even the confusion is clear. It's
Of course.
clearly not anything to worry about.
Yeah.
Clearly just whatever.
Its very nature is confusion because it has no coherence. The notion that there could be no coherence is a notion that can't be found. And God knows no coherence can be found, so.
Clear as mud, but covered with that.
Yeah.
The whole very notion of coherence or incoherence is kind of irrelevant. It's a
Well, it's completely irrelevant.
non sequitur. It's just, it doesn't follow with anything, or it doesn't follow from anything.
Yeah, but so the whole
But it's
human,
still
the whole human
felt,
mind,
yeah.
whatever, is based on some sense of possible coherence. Whatever. Sort of excluding everything else, which is kind of dangerous to do.
Sure.
Yeah. Even words these days just seem to kind of go off into little curls, It's like that.
Well, because they do. Because the words don't mean anything particular. So words becomes an exercise of suggestion, innuendo, and intelligence, as everything else is. No surprise. And so even though, but the end one has this very peculiar seeming that everything embodies a profound degree of intelligence and meaningfulness. And that's one of the strangest aspects of all this. That I call the inherent intelligence. That this is all of this weirdness is not just random incoherence. It's a random incoherence that is, it permeated with or consisting of a profound meaningfulness and intelligence and interrelatedness, even if there's no actual relation, even if there's no actual interrelation. It's a very peculiar, and which enables.
Yeah, it doesn't depend on any structure.
No, but it uses structure, and all structure reflects the intelligence. All structure reflects the meaningfulness. So there's enormous profundity and joy, in meaningfulness in dancing with and exploring all the structures, even though they don't actually resolve into anything. And language is a case in point. As you said, words don't mean anything, and yet that doesn't render them pointless, per se, in any simple sense.
We keep on using it and implying definition.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the naive supposition that there's definition, but there's not. But the actual definition is as vehicles for intelligence, which is the same thing as all form.
And what you say, what you put is not what they seem.
But again, since everything's in that of that nature, that's not really a surprise.
But it's important to remember that.
Absolutely.
That everything is not as it seems.
Oh yeah. There's a wonderful Buddhist sutra. I don't remember from what tantra it is. It's translated. It goes, "Nothing is as it seems, nor is it otherwise." Mm-hmm. So nothing is as it seems, but that doesn't mean it's some other way. It isn't. It pulls the rug out from under you and doesn't give you another rug.
Right. That's a good one.
Nothing is as it seems, nor is it otherwise.
That's right.
It's not that it's not this way and it's some other way. It's not this way, and it's also not any other way.
Well, right there, I think, is the whole problem, you might say, of this whole question of awakening.
Yeah, I agree.
Looking for the other.
Yeah.
Yes. We're trying to find, oh, well, I'm not awake, so there must be some other way which I should be in order to be awake. And that's what
the assumption
all the
that
teachers
the assumption that awakening is something other than delusion. So there's delusion, and then there's awakening, and awakening is something other, and it's somehow better or your improved version or something. Well, that's a complete
You're
fallacy.
saying that one dream is better
Awakening
than
is the
another.
discovery that there never was any delusion in the first place, but it's not a new condition. It's just seeing what the actuality of the condition that you thought was delusion actually is. But it's not, it's a substitution of something else for that. It's just the revelation of that.
It takes about 30 seconds, actually. If you read that paragraph about that, you're done.
Well, hey,
the whole
go for
history
it.
is gone.
Go ahead, go for it.
You just have to- the rest of it is just trying to believe that 30 seconds worth of.
Yeah, sure. And if you didn't try to believe it, then you didn't see it.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, all of reality, all of actual present experience proves and reveals and directly conveys its nature. And so when you see that nature, then all of reality is continually reminding you of that. It's not like there's something else you need to remember that then is the antidote to your reality. Reality itself is the proof of its nature. Reality itself is the proof of its transcendental nature. It's the proof of its, its unresolvability. It's emptiness, as the Buddhists put it. I mean, very rightly, they put emptiness at the core of their teaching, although it's rapidly being usurped by compassion in modern times, unfortunately. Confusingly, let's say. But emptiness is not something you need to find that's some opposite of reality. Reality reveals emptiness. Reality reveals unresolvability. So the actual, mundane, day-to-day, obvious, nuts and bolts presence of experience is the proof of its transcendental nature. It's the proof of all of this stuff. So realization doesn't need a backlog of, a boilerplate to prove it and uphold it and do the math. The math is right here. It's the other way around, actually. Delusion needs all of this backlog of boilerplate and everything to uphold it because it's bullshit. It's not true. So therefore, it needs a whole lot of propping up to try to sell its truthfulness. It's like these various political platforms. They're obviously bullshit. So you have to have a whole lot of rhetoric in order to try and claim the bullshit is the bullshit.
Right. Make it seem like it's true.
Well, and I think that's very true what you're saying about, so it isn't all of that, stuff that is needing bolstering, but it isn't anything else either. There's no political party that's going to be better than any other political party.
No, it's just things changing.
It's just
appearing to change.
this,
Yeah.
appearing as
Well, political
or
parties claiming to relevance is like the structures of delusion claiming to relevance. They're just actually, it's not that they're non-existent, it's just that they're irrelevant and have absolutely no importance.
They actually have no meaning themselves.
That's true.
No meaning, no importance, because they aren't what's doing things. The flow of events is not being done by politics. It's not being done by humans. It's not being done by money. It's being done by immediate radiance. What appears in your experience isn't put there by politicians. It's put there by miraculous radiance.
Of course, all this changes if Trump becomes president.
Well, yeah, that's the only exception.
He's gonna shut down the radiance. License the
Shut down the
radiance.
radiance.
there'll be no more Satsang like this.
Yeah.
Except the Trump Towers. I mean, it'll be nice to feature. It's pretty nice underground to do that today.
Yeah.
I like this tunnel.
Did you check the tires or not?
Oh, we good?
Oh, we haven't checked the,
Other devices.
what is it been shit, huh?
Check the time with the time.
Oh, I don't remember. What time did we arrive, Peter?
Noon.
It's 2, so it's a little after 2. Let me go a little bit
I
down.
just did.
Oh, you did? Oh, that's where you were. I thought you were in the bathroom.
What do you have to?
2 hour talk.
You just move it.
Oh, because I've been here since about 10 hours.
Doesn't matter, it's as of now.
There's no mark, so.
There's no marks, you got another 2 hours.
Oh, it's as of.
As of whenever they put a mark,
Yeah.
you can park from 2 hours from that point on.
Oh.
You know exactly when that point
Even though
is.
it doesn't mean anything. It's better to not get a parking ticket.
Yeah, well, you know, kind of have to pay parking tickets, sort of.
It's even on Sundays, huh? These days, you don't do much.
Even on Sundays.
Oh, in that case, all bets are off.
Well, not have to do
Well,
it. Those are-
Up until recently, it's been
In San
chalk.
Francisco, they do it with cameras.
How'd they do it?
With what?
With cameras.
So they're just looking at
Oh.
like a picture of, okay, as they go by?
Sure, there'll be.
I haven't seen a description, but I can imagine. I don't know.
Yeah, some guy in Sonoma, because told me that they do it for them, they don't shop these days.
Oh, that's not good.
Oh, it's.
We can't cheat.
No, they still using chalk here in Belgium. Come on.
They're still using inflatable dummies in their police cars, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true, they do that as well,
I
don't
haven't
they?
seen him for quite a while.
You haven't?
There used to be one parked down that way a little ways.
I've got
They
photos.
fire.
They got fire. Inflatable dummies. It's good.
He got transferred to the test credit department.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, going back to Irma's original question, I don't think that
What was
these,
Irma's original question?
what about different awakenings?
Oh, yeah.
These Zen teachers who are having a conversation discussing about how there's different awakenings and awakenings of the bodies and awakenings
Yeah.
of the heart and awakenings of the mind.
Yeah.
I'm just, no, it's not what I said.
Oh, it's not what you said.
No.
Well, we can rewind the tape.
Original question, Irma?
I just found it inspiring that no matter how awake a person thinks they are, there's still like just these endless awakenings, and that they happen through the body actually, and through the heart, and it's a kind of an emotional. Well, it's a different kind of experience, and it's ever evolving and deep and rich and mind blowing and
But that's the nature of awakening, is that's, you see it, what this is anyway.
yeah.
Well, the whole thing about profundity is interesting because it is very profound.
It's infinitely profound. It's the concrete presence of an actual miracle.
Yeah.
That experience is happening is a concrete, undeniable presence of the miraculous. How can this be? How could experience be happening? How can experience be present? What's doing it? What's it made of? You know, I mean, it's absolutely and blatantly, obviously inconceivable, infinitely inconceivable, and yet completely, obviously actual. It's the living presence of the absolutely miraculous.
Absolutely. It's so incredible.
As I was saying,
Yes.
I think the people who expect different awakenings, they're not, their awakening is not invalidated by the fact that they don't understand what's going on.
Right.
Oh, sure.
Their awakening may or may not be real, and it's got nothing to do with their bullshit opinions about other.
Sure.
I've lost you.
Just because Guru A says there's an awakening in my heart, and next week I'm going to have an awakening in my head, and last week I had an awakening in my feet, that doesn't mean that he didn't have an awakening. It just means that he misunderstands what's going on.
How do you know that? How do you know there's a misunderstanding? You don't
Because
know that.
I do know that because of what they say, that there is yet another awakening, or there was another awakening, or there will be another
Needs to be
awakening.
They didn't say that.
Okay, so I misunderstood your question. I understood you to say that there were several
No,
awakenings,
well,
and
there
that
are
is a
every
mistake.
minute. There is every minute. It's not
Okay.
a specific thing.
Well, I agree. It's not a specific thing, so therefore categorizing it around hearts and minds and
Well,
and
it's
bodies and this
irrelevant.
and that and the other is
Totally
the
another life.
absurdity.
It's absurd.
But the very presence of experience is an ongoing awakening of infinity is awakening to itself, ongoingly, eternally. And that is always the case, and has always been the case. And realization doesn't consist of that happening. Realization consists of noticing that that is what has always been happening and always will be happening. So one's unrealized past is discovered to be actually the naked revelation of infinity awakening to itself that was misinterpreted as being my pathetic life.
It's all reality.
It's all reality.
In its own way.
Well, in the only way there is, in the way, which can look like anything, but it is always exactly this. It can look like anything, but it never deviates from what everything else is, what the actuality is.
I could have sworn San Francisco was saying anything.
It's like Brigadoon.
Oh, it's disappeared.
Every 100 years, it
It's gone.
It just turned white and fluffy.
That's it.
From the point of view of presenting spirituality, I object to presenting it in terms of parts or pieces or sub-assemblies or hierarchies, because the very essence, the very nature of what this is that it is one thing that happens in one way that can look like anything, and to break this one thing that happens in one way down to, well, it's actually this that can happen in this way and then that can happen in that way, is putting confusing, unnecessary notions that are actually untrue. I personally am a bit of an extremist in terms of approaching things that way.
I mean, it is a classic marketing technique.
Well,
Well, it's got to.
Claiming that we have the
Well,
product
it's
that will
like
give you
everybody
the.
have the same experience. You have.
Yes.
There's only one
There's only one
experience,
thing.
only
They're
one
all-
There's
experience.
only one
Same
experience, but you
experience,
cannot
but-
describe what that experience is, so
Right.
it's very difficult to say.
And when you
what
say
my
the same, it will always
By
look
description.
different. It will never look the same. But what it is that which can look like anything. But it is what it is. It is that which can look like anything. The experience of a quark, the experience of an inconceivably evolved, hyper-intelligent sentience that incorporates, multiple star systems, is exactly the same basic event as the event of your experience. It's one event, but it can look very different. But it's not actually different. There's no actual Because there's nothing to be different. Radiant presence is radiant presence. Radiant presence doesn't become more radiant presence.
Okay, so it is experienced through a medium
No,
of experience.
the medium of experience is itself.
Is it self?
Okay,
Responsive
it's
operation.
as whichever way it appears.
Sure, you can say as, yeah,
Okay, so.
but it can appear like
so
anything.
Because of that, then it's experienced as that. And
Sure.
we can't know we really can't know how it's experienced other than as that particular.
When you say how it's experienced, you mean what it looks like?
Or how it's experienced by other
Felt
people.
sense of recognition. I mean, it's difficult.
The felt sense of recognition is always presence. Presence is the felt sense of recognition. And then the flavor that presence seems to be wrapped in, the radiance, is absolutely infinite. So it can look like anything.
That's right.
And you know that from your own experience, and you can extrapolate that from any possible experience as just extending the infinity of the range of the ways it can look. I mean, what's the experience of an amoeba look like to the amoeba? I can tell you one thing for sure, it looks like presence. And then it looks like whatever characteristics or flavors or qualities seem to be present. And there's no way of predicting what that will be. Just like there's no way of predicting what flavors or characteristics your experience is going to be in the next instant.
It's likely to be more profound than the immediate.
Well,
Or maybe not.
no,
I think
not.
not. Just different. Or a rock, or an electron, or a galaxy. But when there is experience, infinity is what is doing the experience. Infinity is the medium of experience, and infinity is the object of experience. So infinity is experiencing infinity by means of infinity. That is always the case. And so you go look at what's experiencing your experience, you don't find anything, you find an infinity. Infinity is a shorthand for unresolvability. I mean, that's the French or Latin for unresolvable, no end, without end.
Could you
without
say
resolvability.
eternity is another word for that, Peter?
Well, you could, except that eternity implies is specifically oriented towards time.
Yeah.
Whereas
If you
infinity
took eternity
infinity means without boundary,
right.
which is perhaps more specifically spatial, but it can apply across the board, a boundary in any sense.
Uh-huh.
And eternity has emotional weight.
What? But if you took eternity without,
all
and you
kinds
took
of
away
reasons.
those emotional, it could imply.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the time dimension, infinity is eternity.
Right. Eternal.
But even talking about a time dimension is absurd, because a time dimension can't be found as a separate thing, because when you go looking for a time dimension, what you find is this presence.
Yeah.
And again, you can't resolve what that is, so you end up, I mean, it's all just empty assertion. Any field of discourse is empty assertion. That you start. Well, let's talk about it in terms of the time dimension. It's like, it's all hot air. But any qualification is equal hot air.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the only true thing you can say is this, and even that's very shaky. But that's about as accurate as you can get. And if you start qualifying it more than that, you're manufacturing bullshit. I mean, you're making empty assertions which can't be verified because of the nature of unresolvability. I mean, if they can't be verified, is not some sketchy philosophy.
No, it's very
it's concrete. Try and pin down exactly what it is, and it's like you couldn't fucking look. It's not going to happen.
To think about what we'd be spending our time on if we really just thought that we really cannot ever pin anything down in terms
Well, you'd be spending your time.
Scientific research or.
Well, you'd be doing exactly whatever it is you are doing. I mean, that's what we are doing.
Right.
But given that you can't pin anything down, okay, then what? You sit in the chair for a while, not pinning anything down, and then you feel like you have to pee, so you get up and you go find the bathroom, or you don't, you just pee where you are, and then you sit in a wet chair. I mean, you know,
All right.
the chain of events perpetuates itself, apparently, as the actual unresolvability of radiant presence.
It's basically a giant sheet and a giant bed, and you can't figure out which way the sheet goes, and you just keep going forever.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
But what there is to do is you shift the bed, or you shift the sheet, or you don't, and you make the bed, or you don't.
I think what happens,
The bed sheets are not wet.
I think what happens when you accept that, if you will, accept that responsibility, is you enjoy it.
Yeah,
We've lost it.
yeah.
When you relax, then you discover event is perpetuating itself. Because it's not like anyone is actually doing anything. And when you discover that no one's doing anything, then what seems to happen, and you're not actually doing it or not doing it. And that it is seems to be what it seems to be, while not actually being that, is just a transcendental inevitability that has nothing to do with personal agency. So then there may be physicists investigating quarks, and there may be artists painting canvases, and there may be, spiritual philosophers sitting around living with bullshitting, but none of that actually means anything. I mean, none of that is
Yeah.
There's no implication.
And that's where pain comes in, when you think it does mean something. When
Yeah.
Because
when you want to get rid of what's happening.
Right, and
Right.
the basis of the pain is the fact that you have to be maintaining that self-importance. It's a lot of work. It's effort. Whereas when you relax, it's easy, and the pain dissipates because it does itself. So there's no onus on you. There's nothing for you to uphold. You don't have a dog in the fight. You're just like, oh, okay, whatever.
Look, in a way to say it doesn't mean anything, in a way you could say it totally means exactly what it is,
Well, sure.
or what it seems.
Well, absolutely.
And that has a kind of, it has a kind of innate profundity.
Right, but it doesn't mean anything in terms of a linear
No,
goal orientation or a fantasy of achieving this
but
or
it's
avoiding that.
meaning in a sort of essential sense.
Oh, absolutely. That's the actual meaning, the inherent meaning. The meaning of the inherent intelligence, which is the continual dancing infinity and continually dancing with its own meaningfulness.
The Dancing with Wolves study group, which is very popular about 15 years ago.
That's right. Yeah. Probably 20, but at least
I think in terms of more profound metaphysical symbology, it'd probably be dancing with serpents. But we're getting back to biblical symbology there.
Clarissa. I met her. She was very nice.
Interestingly, everything we've been talking about today is summed up very nicely in the myth of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, as you all have heard me talk about many times.
Say again.
Yeah. Speak to us of the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and the expulsion from the garden it's a very, very clear and succinct and comprehensive myth of the nature of radiant presence and the possibility of being with radiant presence versus being with confused interpretations of radiant presence. Adam and Eve forget about what Adam and Eve are when they came from and all that. That's other mythology, well, equally poignant, but in this case, not immediately germane. So Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, and Lord tells them, "Okay, there's two trees here. You can eat the fruit of the tree of life as much as you want, but don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil." So we know this. So anyway, so they're sitting around scarfing on the fruit of the tree of life, and everything's very good. And then there's a serpent, and the serpent offers Eve, and I'll go back to what every element of this is is immediately and pointedly a part of the explanation. The serpent offers the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil to Eve, and she succumbs. Now, the serpent is a symbol of energy. It's a sine wave. It's so basically all energy, i.e. radiance, i.e. experiential characteristics. So now Eve symbolizes the Adam and Eve symbol as the male and female in terms of the sort of Kabbalic philosophy back then. Eve is the sensory portion of the human functioning, whereas Adam is like the intellect or the abstract, or the spirit, more spiritual. So Eve is oriented towards sensory experience, towards carnality, towards enjoyment of experiential energy, whereas Adam is more aloof and more transcendental and subjective and intellectual, I suppose, roughly speaking. So the serpent offering the fruit of the tree. Now, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's obviously discrimination. That's this versus that.
Here is the opposites.
Well, any of this being different from any of that. So difference.
Right.
The tree of fruit of the tree of life is all just fruit of the tree of life. This fruit and that fruit, or who gives a shit? They're the same thing. Whereas the fruit of the tree of knowledge and evil is like, okay, is this the good stuff or is this the bad stuff?
Yeah,
So
they have
it's
flavor.
differentiation. Now, differentiation is imposed upon experiential energy, i.e. experiential characteristics, which is the serpent, by sensory enjoyment. So when the sensory enjoyment orients towards the energy, towards the radiance, in terms of qualifying it as this and that, and the implication of value judgments with that, that's what causes the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise. That simple thing. So, in other words, when you're with your experience as radiance, as one thing, you're eating the fruit of the tree of life, and you're in Eden, you're in paradise. It's perfection. There is no world, there is no you, there's no self, there's no other, there's no better, no worse, there's radiant presence. But when you're, all of a sudden, when there's this and that, when there's red and blue, and good and bad, and and superior and inferior, and better and worse, and winning and losing, and success and failure, and me and you, and all of this other things, and then all the complexity and confusion and implication that comes with that. It's that very fact that is, in fact, let's say causes, but in fact constitutes the expulsion from paradise. So, it's an important elements to that to remember is the serpent and the woman, because it has to do with the energy, the radiance. It's not about the presence; it's about the radiance. It's about dwelling on there's a this and versus some that. Anytime there's a this that can be distinguished from some that, that's Eve eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that's going to kick you out of paradise. So that's the very nature of delusion. That's the very nature of what causes the problem.
I had an experience with that once, where I had a couple of weeks of just unconditional joy, and one day I had this day in San Francisco that was just a lovely day. Brunch and lunch and discovered parklets and
It's always about food, isn't it?
Well, duh.
Well,
even in the Garden of Eden, you're eating this fruit. It's all about the eating.
I went to usher this show, and I was really in this state of unconditional joy. And I started thinking about my day, and what a great day I had. And I thought, this was good, this is good. Yeah.
As soon as you have this, that implies that.
Nauseous.
Yeah.
Literally got nauseous.
Of course.
And I had to stop. Once I stopped, it was okay. But it was like defining anything as good or bad was lower than whatever the state I was in.
Yeah. And the defining is good or bad follows on the defining. It's the defining that's the root problem. Having any this, as soon as there's a this that's distinguishable from a that, then that opens the door to qualification to better and worse, and all of a sudden you're fucked.
Right, then that's what happens.
Well, this is not abstract or even subtle. It's blatant.
Yeah,
But the implications are profound because if you take it all the way, it goes directly towards what we've been talking about today, which is seeing the radiant presence, which alone exists, which constitutes every and anything, versus drawing distinction between some this and some that. There's this awakening and that awakening, or there's, this or this, or, and as soon as you start drawing distinctions, you're fucked. There's no way to do that and not lose, because it's the drawing distinctions itself which is the losing, and all of a sudden you're out of the garden. And you're not out of the garden as a punishment. You're out of the garden because the garden is that which is created by the inherent homogeneity of things. And when you don't let yourself recognize that homogeneity anymore, you stop being able to appreciate it, the implication of it. And that is what constitutes being suffering, constitutes delusion, it constitutes a separate life.
Then in some point, in some way, all difference is known as this.
Exactly.
And
that's what you see radiant presence.
Right.
Yeah, because then infinite difference is all just radiant presence. It's the
Right.
nature of radiant presence to present as infinite difference.
Choose.
And at that point, the variety is not a problem. It's not an issue. And even extreme discrimination and selectivity is not a problem. Because if I really prefer this, it's okay, cool. But the this that I'm really preferring is actually radiant presence, and the that I'm avoiding is radiant presence. So it's still a zero-sum game.
And the preferring is radiant presence.
Exactly. So the whole thing collapses into itself without negating any sub-mode.
It's incredible.
Dude.
An amusing sidelight to that story is Adam and Eve themselves in the first place, where they came from. So Eve is made from a rib of Adam.
I was just gonna go
And
there, like,
the
why
rib-
is not Adam?
No,
The rib,
that's not true.
what's not true?
Uh-oh.
Well, I'm sorry, what's the truth?
Wait. Let him have his truth, and you have your truth.
No, it's okay. No,
No, let her
I
go.
want to hear where you're going.
I'm not telling my story, I'm telling the Bible story. So according to the Bible, Eve is made from a rib of Adam. Now, the significant symbology there is the rib is a crescent, which is a moon, and the moon shines by reflected light. So this is the key to the fact that femininity, in terms of the early Bible, is a sense of otherness, is a sense of a projection as otherness.
Right.
So Adam is self, Eve is other, in the sense that any kind of experientiality being projected as any kind of otherness, any kind of environment, any kind of outside of oneself. The seed of that is encoded in this difference between Adam and Eve. So when they talk about Eve, they're emphasizing the otherness, the experiential, the objective pole of experiencing. And when they talk about Adam, they're emphasizing the subjective, or the self, the self-focused.
You don't even
pole.
you don't even need the question moon. As soon as just making something that's other
Yeah,
doesn't even need the symbol. Yeah.
right. But when you get that Adam and Eve are not two beings, and it's not about gender. It's about selfness and otherness.
Right.
And then that key makes the Garden of Eden story understandable, because then you get that it's the addiction to sensory experience in terms of qualifying it.
Right.
That is the whole serpent and tree of knowledge of good and evil and Eve thing.
Sensory experience, just as long as
Sensory
you qualify it.
experience is fine. Yeah.
As long as you don't qualify.
Yeah, because then you're still eating. It's Adam and Eve, you don't have to, it's not a matter of eliminating some sense of otherness. It's a matter of eliminating otherness as consisting of this is and that.
Right.
Then and that's eating from the fruit of the fruit of the tree of life, which is wholeness and which is essentially integrated. So there's no
trees
no
are
harm, no
actually
foul.
probably the same tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the key issue there is discrimination with subsequent qualification and hierarchization.
Well, discrimination with the falling into that it is something. That discrimination actually is something.
Right. That's what I mean. I mean, an actual this supposing there's an actual this versus an actual that.
Yeah, because I mean, what are they standing there going like, do you think this is a this? Or
It's a difference between. It's a difference between. It's a difference
What
between.
is that?
It's a difference between watching a movie and remembering it's a movie versus watching a movie and supposing there's a bunch of separate people that are actually interacting and they're actually there. You know, that's eating from the. And then you really worry about whether our hero is going to succeed or not, or the Nazis are going to get them or whatever. You know, whereas when it's all a movie, it's just a hoot, and who gives a shit?
So is there anything about the fig leaves?
Were there actual fig leaves in the Garden of Eden? I think that's.
After they ate from the tree of good and evil.
That's right, they had to
Oh,
cover up the sun.
they saw they were naked.
Oh, wait a minute, you don't look like me. Okay, this might be fun.
But why didn't they cover up with apple leaves?
That's where the this and the that is came. He had the this, she had the that.
They're probably all dates anyway.
Yeah, they weren't apples, they were dates or something, right?
They went, look,
Literally.
Figs are all pretty good.
Figs are good. Take a fig.
And grape leaves are too small.
Well, the way
There is that.
even to denote something as actual is to discriminate.
Of course, any kind of discrimination, any degree of thisness versus thatness, which can be very, very subtle.
Very. My God.
You know, I mean,
Because it doesn't change the fact, does it?
exactly, that's the point. And the fact is omnivorous. The fact is inclusive, and there's only one fact, which is presence.
So you can discriminate, but you can't hierarchize.
Yeah.
Well, you could do that too, but the whole thing is that it's
You don't believe that it's
Yeah.
actual. It's actualizing it.
yeah.
Okay, so it's not a real hierarchy, as long as you don't believe the hierarchy is real.
Yeah, as long as
You
it's
can
all
say, I like
hypothetical.
this better than that, but this is all one.
But you have to experientially have that experience. You can't just intellectually
Yeah,
have the
yeah.
experience.
You know that it's knowing that it's one is the point. That's the key point. And
Good.
which again is not a leap because that's the actual fact.
Right.
You have to deny that fact to create a separation that's not an inclusiveness.
So you
You
just
deny
have to
the fact that
start
it's all one.
denying your false, what you used to believe
Yeah,
prior.
sure.
Yeah.
Very strange state of affairs.
I reckon you shouldn't believe anything.
Right. That's the simple stance.
Simple.
Is that a belief?
People believe it.
That is a reckoning.
You don't have to believe it.
It's my experience. Which may or may not be able to believe.
Well, and did
But
they say
it is possible to see that there is nothing that is believable. And that's not a belief, that's an observation. That's self-evident. And when you see that, then that invalidates any believing. Because you have to bootstrap something to believe in into existence, because nothing like that actually exists inherently. Because if you go looking for something like that, again, due to unresolvability, you don't actually find it. I mean, you say, I believe in X, any principle, anything whatsoever. I believe you're sitting there, or I believe in freedom, or I believe in the North Pole, or I believe in anything. Doesn't matter what it is. When you go looking for any of those things, you don't actually find them. You literally cannot find them. I mean, a physicist can go looking for something and they won't find it. They'll find a cloud of probabilities.
Actually, the North Pole is a good one.
Yeah.
Because theoretically, there's some place where that is at the exact center of the Earth spinning around, at least in one moment. But there isn't any place. It just wouldn't be any place.
So the point is you can't find it because you can't pin it down, because nothing can be pinned down. In any sense.
Stop fucking with Santa Claus.
Really, stop fucking with Santa Claus. Why?
You're Jewish. Come on.
Santa takes care of himself.
That's right. He's got all those little elves.
You know, all those little 4 and 5 years.
But when you see that there is nothing that is believable,
Yeah.
then you see belief. You see the belief itself is an arbitrary, flow of energy based on nothing, which is like everything else, and i.e. is radiant presence. So who gives a shit?
Well, it isn't quite like that, because you still do give a shit in a way, but it doesn't imply what you think it should imply.
Well, no, you don't give a shit. It just giving a shit happens, and that's where the fallacy and the delusion comes in. There's a belief that there's a you giving a shit,
Exactly.
and giving a shit just sort of happens, and then it goes away because
Right.
suddenly you're not giving a shit.
That's a very
anything.
good point. The
There is
fine
no
point
shit
of
here.
identification.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to go.
You may not be there being anyone to identify with.
Well, the difference between giving a shit and having giving a shit happen and not giving a shit to giving a shit happens
Right.
is a question of whether you're identifying with the giving a shit or or identifying with anything.
Yeah.
And this is not just hyperbole. This is actually an important point.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
So all of these psychological conditions are not an issue when you don't identify with them.
Right.
So you can give a shit and be a bigot and have preferences and just be a general and aspire to things and really want to succeed at something and really want to avoid something and all of this kind of thing, which in a simplistic sense one might assume is, boy, there's an awful lot of discrimination going on there. But if you're not identifying with any of that, it's just random energy events, which is pure radiant presence, and which is being maintained by the flow of karma, which is again pure radiant presence, and has nothing to do with anyone whatsoever. So the non-identification renders it null and void in terms of being entrapping, and that's the very nature of liberation.
And that is totally, that's totally the Bhagavad Gita. As long as
Sure.
you offer the fruit of your labor to God, you don't take any stuff.
Sure.
There you are.
Even the
That's what Donald
identification
Trump is doing.
cannot be
Huh?
even the identification cannot be identified.
Well, so, yeah, sure.
That's his main.
And
In other words,
yeah.
get
Oh, yeah.
lost in that. This is how
Oh,
it
yeah.
is.
He's enlightened.
Yeah, for me, like, my
It
favorite.
will literally undo itself.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as it ever needs to.
Yeah.
My favorite 3 words are "This is happening."
Sure.
And then
Exactly.
I don't believe it.
Give it up.
You are a troublemaker, dude.
Just give it up.
It's not really happening, but
The irony is that in defining things, you're actually diminishing them. They actually get diminished. You're not diminishing anything. They get diminished so as to create the fantasy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's itself a magic trick is in that,
Sure.
in the diminishing, in the defining.
When you create a fantasy of something, the fantasy will be inherently
And-
less than the
And
actuality.
it's ironic because that's the one thing that most spiritual aspirants don't want. They want the big picture in a sense. They want the thing that
The mistake is having a fantasy about what the big picture is, because then you're actually creating
you're
a little
diminishing
picture,
it. You're
a little
making it
picture
into
of the big picture,
some
and
other thing.
orient to that, and so it's just tying yourself into more knots.
so I want to hear no Adam ribs.
Oh.
Yeah, let's hear
What happened to Adam?
let's hear the refutation.
We just never ever talked about where Adam came
Yeah, we're not.
No, Adam was an image of God.
But he
Adam
made
is,
it out of dust. Didn't he get some clay in?
that's it. Adam came from clay, but where did clay come from? God created itself. And,
Well, and the truth is that the serpent has gone to Adam, none of this would have been a problem. So, you know, the fact that God had to create woman in order for there to be a story, you know, was sort of.
Well, he
really
started out with
quite
Adam, and Adam turned out to be a bit of a dolt. He was kind of dumb, you know, he wasn't doing anything. There was no action.
Still being God in the age of ancient snake.
I mean, you know, I rest my case, right?
I hear snake is pretty good.
Sitting around watching TV, drinking.
Well, you know what the snake actually was, right? You remember, Adam came first. Oh, this is so funny.
So the ocean is actually underneath the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel the floorboards going like this.
When this place starts floating, it's when we got that big tsunami that's coming and the water rising. This place will just float. They just need to put some
You won't
tires
float.
on that's, yeah. You have to unmoor it and put big tires underneath it and float.